Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. First hour is general discussion about all the things that people ask questions about, media and virtual production. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. This week, we are spending time planning the rest of the year, or at least talking about the trajectory of that. So we're going to be talking about subjects. Today, we're talking about audio and video. Tuesdays are going to be audio and video this year. Wednesdays are going to be visual effects and 3D and animation. And then on Thursdays, we have artists. Friday will be more nuts and bolts and how to get things done. And of course, Saturday is education. We are bringing in it for education. We're bringing in an hour on YouTube. I know you'll all be excited. Education typically is not an hour on YouTube, but we will be adding that to the mix. So stay tuned for that. We've got a lot of things happening in after hours as well. Tomorrow we'll have both. We have a special discussion at 10 o'clock on tomorrow about racing and about video. So that's an after hours at 10 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. And then at 2, of course, we're going to talk about birding with Lois. And then on Thursday at noon, we'll do some camera matching. So we're going to talk about a little camera matching with some PTZs, just a little bit of a workshop. And then at 2 o'clock, we'll have Isadora. So there's a couple of things going on. We're starting to pick up more and more things where we add things to our after hours as well as office hours. All right, let's jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
The first one comes from Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas, here on the panel. He says, the Zoom acquisition of Liminal created a lot of conversation last week. Would anyone like to briefly summarize their view of what this means for events in Zoom moving forward?
Well, while I'm waiting for anyone else to raise their hand, I will say that I think it's going to change a lot of things about events. I think that in the past, up until now, we really have event groups, and this would be like StreamYard and lots of other things, are trying to funnel everybody into doing everything a certain way. Well, you have a little lower third and you have this little thing. And so they're funneling them into a simplistic view, but limiting what they can do. What liminal inside of Zoom means, I think, is going the other direction, which is that there'll be great turnkey solutions like webinar and events, and those will only get better. But the big thing is that you'll see tons and tons of tools to allow us to customize, to build whatever we want. And so for producers like us who want to build something that is not the same as what everybody else has, that wants to think about things in a different way, it's going to be explosive. And so I think that that's one of the big opportunities to have a tool that's designed to customize Zoom, or having that team inside of Zoom is a really interesting solution. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I just wanted to say, I don't know that much about the technology behind all of this, but I will say that Andy, from the beginnings when he came on Office Hours, always impressed me greatly as having that spirit of the theater community where everything is oriented towards the audience, the customers, the people who are going to use things. So I think that's going to do nothing but increase Zoom's public-facing interest in making sure that they get things as right as they can for the largest number of people. Sometimes a person's hiring into a company, and I'm not saying Andy's going to change everything for Zoom. Zoom's a big organization with a lot of constituencies, but I do think the spirit that he showed us here about community involvement and making it right, he can only take that and help Zoom become even more of that, and that would be great because a lot of people depend on that service.
Yeah, and I think that, again, there's a lot of things that you can do really easily in Zoom, and people can run whole meetings with the vanilla version. But the ability for us to be able to design interfaces and interactions that you couldn't design any other way is going to, I think, really blow up what's possible in events. And it really is going to I really believe that virtual events at this point are on a trajectory to become what I would call the big show. You know, I'm not saying that physical events will go away, but they're going to, radio was the big show for a while. And then this little thing called TV came on. And I think that it's kind of like that. It's not that that physical events will go away. They just won't mean what they used to. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Rupert McCrae on Dallas, Texas again. Any recent news from CES?
Alex?
Well, nothing amazing, but I kind of like what Hyper have announced. Hyper are the people that make docks for Macs, and they have this dock for the 24-inch iMac, which is essentially a base in which you put your iMac on top of, and it can turn through multiple degrees and also has various ports on it, and a few other things. So not huge, but I happen to like that, and they announced it for CES for some reason.
I go ahead, John.
2 weeks ago on Mac Break Weekly, I don't know if you remember this, Alex, that Leo was saying that he had talked to Scott Wilkinson, and Scott has some new TV technology that was supposed to be announced at CES. So I'm looking forward to hear what that technology
is. That the QNED? Is that new?
They didn't
think
know.
That's new.
Yeah, you don't think that's new? Yeah, so I don't know if I've seen anything that jumped out from CES so far. Other than those numbers may not be new, but with the announcements, I saw that there's 200,000 pre-orders for the Ford 150, electric Ford 150. So that was interesting.
There is also a rather silly announcement about HDMI 2.1a, which is continuing the idea of adding new features to HDMI, but not requiring that people actually say that they can be compatible with it, but they don't actually have to add those features to it. So they're muddying HDMI even more with.
Yeah, we've talked about it a little bit. I mean, I think that I'm excited about 2.1a because it continues the progress of the OTT boxes, basically rendering the TVs, all the features on the TV to be useless. Like that's what people like me want, is we want the TV. Like I think somebody could come out with lo and behold, a TV without any features. It just says, I will take the video that I get and put it out. And I won't do any processing or anything else. I'll just put out the picture as close to what I get as I possibly can. I think there's a business there. Like for some TV company, when everybody's going left, you go right. And somebody could go out with a featureless TV that just does what it's supposed to do, which is put a video on a screen. And so I think that what 2.1a does is that primarily allows us to push an SDR tone map down the pipeline. Now it'll be hard because you'll have to make sure that everything's compatible with it, as you said. But if you have a TV that's compatible with that, and you have an Apple TV that's compatible with that, or a Roku or whatever, it means that the OTT box is doing the hard work and not the TV, because the TV is not capable of it. The TVs, they are cheap when it comes to building the TVs, and they skimp on the chips, and so the chips are painful, and I have to stream to them. So that's why I'm so bitter about it, is I have to stream to these TVs, and these TVs basically nail your feet to the ground when you're trying to stream, because they're so under resourced. Go ahead, Alex.
I mean, that actually reminds me that, of course, I'm sort of something for HDMI 3, which, of course, is that multiple pieces of video and audio are sent as objects and then composited in the set-top box. And then, of course, that makes no difference particularly to the TV. So that's the HDMI 3. This is what I propose, at least. Object-oriented media.
Yeah, it could be. We've been talking about that for, only 20 years. It'd be really good to have layers. Next question.
Next one comes from Danny Law in Malaysia here on the panel. Now that liminal is part of Zoom, does that mean we can update Zoom without fearing that it would cause Zoom ISO to misbehave?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I think as long as Zoom ISO is a separate program, it may break at some point. But the good news, our man at Zoom, Andy, is likely to have access to these Zoom updates before they get released. And perhaps down the road, maybe Zoom ISO will become part of Zoom and actually written into the code.
Go, Rupert.
I think some of the challenges for Andy and Zoom ISO came with, when Zoom made updates to their SDKs or to their APIs, less so the actual client itself. So, now with those guys being in-house, they'll get closer, I guess, awareness to those changes on the SDK side and the API side when they're coming down the pipe. Of course, there's no guarantees. Things can still happen. I would just keep an eye. I always keep an eye on the release notes from Zoom, number one, and it'll be interesting to see how where the release notes for Zoom ISO and Zoom OSC go, and where one should subscribe to see those changes coming down the pipe.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see. I don't think that right now you could do that, but I think that a year from now, you probably are going to see a very tight integration between all those tools. So I think that it'll be exciting to watch. Next question.
Mitchell Hill, Wilmington, Delaware, here on the panel, is up next. Since office hours is a good example of how to improve your Zoom image, what do we next do to spread the word?
I go ahead, Rupert.
It's what I try to do is just try to bring this same level of quality and structure to anything else that I'm involved in, and then sooner or later people start asking questions, and those are your best audience, the curious people, the people who notice and start asking questions, and then you can sort of lead them or show them where to go. But trying to gather people is can be hard work when not everybody is listening.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I don't know many other examples of good quality Zoom image, audio, lighting that office hours represents. I think that we want to be an example that people point to and say, we want it to be like that. And by doing it, you certainly create that. And I think Alex has the plan that when 2.0 is released, the world's going to know more about what we're doing. And we'll lead by example. And that's very important.
Absolutely. Sky?
I exactly the point of, I referred to office hours as the AV CrossFit, because ruthless reviews are not something that people want to think they want to be a part of until they see the benefit of what CrossFit can do at lifting a tire, having other people yell at you, do better, you can do it, keep going. And some people don't like, they stop at just the yelling part, and ruthless sounds like yelling, but the benefit is what we're seeing here in the honesty of, if you want to change, if you want to be better, this is an amazing space. But as we're pioneering, people are afraid of even the word ruthless. So that's the challenge.
Go ahead, Alex.
Well, I think part of it is actually smuggling in the good quality into the content. So essentially, if we start packetizing the content and making it so that Google and YouTube and other things can find it very easily, and it can be embedded in places and people can refer to it in things that they write or things that they talk about or things that they include in podcasts, then smaller units of answers to questions and insights, then people will actually notice the quality, because they won't actually realize, they'll be driven to come and see us and see this quality and see how we put it together, because they actually like the content, and they'll actually maybe to some extent realize how much they believe in what we say because of what we look like or what we sound like, more importantly.
Go ahead, Todd.
For those of you and those of us who are educators, I say don't be shy about just offering courses. My whole virtual presence thing predates office hours by about a year, when I started to do this investigation on my own. And Chris Comfort, in fact, here on the panel today, I celebrate him. His partner came to one of my courses, and that's how I ended up on office hours, was because Chris brought me here. So just creating networks of, make a course for leveling up your virtual presence and deliver it to your network. And that's how we can spread this whole thing, because people are interested and they do come when they know that it's available.
And I would say just keep spreading the word about office hours as well. This is a place where you get to see it over and over again. And of course, you get the folks that are the most interested first, and then the folks that are kind of interested, and the folks that, and at some point the pressure becomes so intense that everybody has to kind of play along. So there's, half of the folks will just get dragged along eventually, because it is I think that we're going to keep on seeing this continue to progress forward. But the key is to get more people to just watch it. The people that you think would be interested. There's no reason to force it on people or to, become, crazy about it. It's just, but when you see people that might be interested in it, I probably share it once or twice a day. Someone like, oh, you should check this out. This might be useful for what you're trying to do. Next question.
Next one comes from Douglas Carmichael, and he says, since so much of business is about building relationships and trust, what would you think of a second hour with Tony Mobley on navigating communications and relationship challenges, especially for those on the spectrum, he notes?
Go ahead, Jeff.
I think it'd be a great idea. Tony is such a warm individual, and he immediately makes people of all different places feel completely at home, and really gets into conversation rather than just technical issues. And he kind of plays the everyman, so that he is the voice of the audience, so that they can feel comfortable coming to a wide variety of, we're primarily talking technical things, but he's talking to people, and he gets technical issues out of the way and gets to the people behind them. So I think it'd be great for Tony and maybe some others to be a part of that second hour of how to communicate.
Go, Jesse.
Douglas, I don't know if this question is concerns that you're experiencing about being on the spectrum and engaging the business, or if this is on behalf of someone else. Either way, I'm going to speak from the heart. I've been doing film production for 20 years, and I don't really know any other industry that has been so understanding and accommodating about the idiosyncrasies that come with being on the spectrum. I've worked in a bunch of industries, but this was good 20 years ago, and it's better now. The community is very understanding. So If it's you or them, walk with confidence, please.
Next question.
Ashadev comes up next in our process, and he says, any plans to make After Hours feed available as an audio stream so we can listen on devices like Alexa, HomePod, or Nest? Would prefer more options than Zoom to listen on specifically.
Go, Rupert.
I think, anything is open for consideration, but we did have a conversation yesterday in the second hour about the future of brainstorming and so on, and some potential sensitive subjects came up there, and we were talking about where may or may not be the right place to discuss things like that. And, After Hours came up as a potential venue for that. Now, if that happens, then part of that consideration is, the audience or who might be listening. If After Hours is streamed to multiple places, there's no real way for anybody in that community at that time to know where the conversation they are having is being broadcast. So it's possible, but it has an effect on it has a convenience for the listener, but it also has it may have an effect on the conversation that happens in After Hours.
Yeah, we are planning to do something related to that at some point. It may not be all of it. It may be, there may be things that we turn on and off. As you know, we started off with not even putting Office Hours on YouTube because we had the problem. We're starting to unlock that by you'll see After Hours starting to have other things in it, because those are conversations that oftentimes either are too slow for what we think we want to broadcast, or they are, that we want to work through something in detail, or like what we're doing tomorrow morning. It's just not something that we could put on YouTube. So I think that those are the things that we want to kind of think through as we go forward. We probably will put it on, make it more available to wider devices. There's probably going to be some authentication that I'm working out that will be required to listen to it. So you'd really have to be part of the group to subscribe to that. It wouldn't be a wider thing, at least to start with. For After Hours, for Office Hours, our plan is to make it as widely available as possible by the end of the year. So radio stations and TV stations, as well as audio streaming and everything else. And that's probably where we'll start first, is trying to get that to a wider audience. And then what happens with After Hours is something we'll build up towards slowly. Next question.
Next one comes from our own Charles Klein here in the panel, and he says, is anyone having issues with the audio MIDI setup app in macOS, giving them an overlapping channels error while routing outputs?
Go ahead, Charles.
Hey guys, so I stumped Apple yesterday after being on the phone with tech support for 3.5 hours. So I bring it to you guys. This is the issue. So I can send a signal. Now the speakers all route tone, but when you go and select the same output as it defaulted as, and you go to apply, it gives you an error that it's overlapping. And that's an issue, right? Then the next thing that I found was, even if I route all my speakers and they're all different channels, it still gives me an issue. And the only way that I was able to get around at least routing the signal for surround was to create an aggregate device and select the same output and then route that, and that actually worked. So after being on the phone with Apple, we recorded the screen, sent everything, and at this point I'm like, I'm gonna ask my people because, yeah.
So you can't do it in a native, you have to put it through something. So it won't work in a native setting. Is that right? Like, that's the problem. Oh, can't hear you.
Yes, but even if you set to its default, where it's only right and left channel to the left and right speaker, and you hit apply, it'll say that there is an overlap issue, which you can see that there's not. So I'm assuming at this point, there just might be a bug in the new operating systems,
Right.
which is weird because before, when we used to mix for clubs, we would set all the left speakers in the room to just take the left channel and the right speakers to take the right channel. And now you can't do that. So
Yeah, interesting. So and this is on Monterey. So this is specifically a Monterey issue.
I saw it the same in Catalina. I hooked up my old machine and I had the same issue. And that's when Apple was like, okay, we're going to send this up. So.
Right. Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Oh, that's a good one. I immediately go to, some sort of overarching setting that is giving you some sort of null pointer that is causing an overlapping channel that is not, not there to begin with, or that is a holdover from something else, I would try plugging in an external sound card that is MIDI enabled. See if you can just kind of do a back and forth and see if that clears it up, because overlapping channels are not a thing in MIDI. I've never seen that one.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Charles, have you tried other audio interfaces, or is this just on the Quantum? I'm wondering if it's a driver issue with that particular interface.
So I had the same question, and the thing is that I can get tone to all the speakers individually, which then that told me and Apple it might not be an issue with the deck itself, because I can send from instead of the MIDI, I can send static, and even when I do the calibration for the Genelec tone thing, it all works perfectly. So then that all brought it back to the OS.
Go ahead, Noah.
Just to guess here, do you know when you're sending to left and right, if that is seen, that stereo pair is seen as a single channel, right? So could you route just the left speaker and see if that works, or just the right speaker? Does that make sense?
It's seen as a default. It sees everything left and right. But even if you click on it and select the same thing that it was originally at, it thinks that now is overlapping, which is where there's a foundational issue going on. So, yeah.
We might be stumped. The funny thing is, I always think about how could this problem ever happen? Well, and then I realize, it's happened enough that someone wrote an interface wrote a dialogue for it. So there's a dialogue. So it's come up. Somebody had to write that dialogue and type that in. So somebody knows what this is. That's all I'm saying. Because you always go, this would never happen, but it's someone thought we got to put a message up here because this isn't going to work. So yeah, it's interesting to see. I would change out the interface first. That would be the first thing that I did, would be to swap it out and make sure, in the land of starting to just eliminate variables, get, moving, changing and renting an interface and playing with it would be the first thing I did. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I'll try and recreate this with my interfaces, but I remember you posted something in Discord. Let's continue that conversation, see if we can get to the bottom of it.
Sounds good. Thanks. Next question.
Next one comes from Douglas Carmichael, and he says, would broadcasting the education hour on YouTube be detrimental to educators speaking freely about issues they are encountering?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I think this is a bit similar to the earlier question. If that particular hour becomes where wider topics are discussed with maybe vendors, then maybe that can become broadcast. But I think if that were to happen, then a different time would be created for the educators where they could have a more free discussion. Where and when those times end up, I guess it might be subject to change, but there may be a use case for both types of hour.
Yeah, one of the things I'm trying to figure out is I scheduled it to where we're going to start broadcasting again at 10. One thing that I'm wondering about that we'll probably talk with the educators on this weekend is it might be better to have the quote unquote second hour that's still streamed go from 8 to 9. Just have an 8 to 9 hour, just keep going and streaming from the first hour to the second hour, and then turn it off and have our discussion. So I got to bring it to the panel for them to think about and talk to the host, Emily. So I got to figure out whether that makes sense or not. But we are going to have weekly, either a technical talk or a guest. So that is, I'm already talking to some potential guests, and I'm sure that the educators will. So there will be an hour that's broadcasted each week starting this year. But there'll be 2 hours that are not broadcasted. And that's been a pretty, the educators have requested that with a fair bit of force, that they would prefer not to. It's a different conversation. And I will say it's a much different conversation since we turned off the stream and since Emily took over. So I think that so I think those two things together has made it a pretty special couple hours. And I'm hesitant to jostle it around too much because it's working so well. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Noah Sargent in Fullerton, California. And Noah asks, do any of you have legendary on-set or industry stories you can share this morning?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I'll reach on back into the legendary roar. which is a film I worked on as a production mixer some 46 years ago. We were shooting a scene in a bathroom with the main character, who was also the director, taking a bath. And also in this tiny little bathroom set were 4 adult male lions. Very tiny set. The cameras were shooting through holes in the walls. It was that cramped. They couldn't get inside the room with it. And in the middle of the scene, let me set it up. Also coming to the set that day was Mr. Hill from McGraw-Hill, the big publishing company. They were trying to woo them as an investor in the movie. And so we're shooting the scene, and in the middle of the scene, one of the lions tends to grab Noel, who was the director sitting in the tub, around the neck and poke a hole in his neck. And so he screamed, jumped out of the tub, chased the lions out the door onto the outside porch of the set, just as Mr. Hill was coming up toward the set. And so they see this crazed, naked man bleeding from the neck, holding a bamboo cane, chasing and screaming expletives at 3 lions that just were also running out of the room. And they couldn't figure out how that was going to be in the movie, and so they, needless to say, didn't invest.
That's going to be a hard one to follow. Go ahead, Marty.
Okay. So this was back in the late 1990s. I was working for one of the major networks, and we were doing a live broadcast of the Special Olympics, and that was happening up in Connecticut. And my cameraman and I were stationed out on Long Island Sound on the top of a lighthouse to do a live broadcast as the athletes were rowing past on Connecticut Sound. And so we go up the day before to do a site survey and check things out. So we get on a boat at like 5 a.m, and we row out, and we get motored out there, and we climb up this old, lighthouse that nobody's living in, to the roof deck that was, first it was covered by poop from all the birds, all the seagulls, and we were going to be there all day long in the hot sun, and that stuff melted. But so how are we going to communicate? We're going to send audio and video by microwave. Say we set up a microwave transmitter back to the shoreline. But how are we going to do comms? Because we have a producer, a director, we have guests, we have talent interviewer, we have camera and audio. How are we going to do comms? Well, the producer who is with the network, he says, I have a phone. Now, back then, this didn't exist. What we had for a cell phone was a shoulder bag with a handset. And that was what they envisioned us, for all of us to use comms. And clearly that was not going to work because we only had one of those, right? So go back to shore, head over to Radio Shack, buy a soldering iron. And I went into the phone and I opened up the microphone and the receiver, and I soldered wires and connectors on so that I could go into headphone amplifiers and a mixer and get microphones back through it. And we were able to do the show. But if not for that, we wouldn't have been able to communicate very well.
And I think this is probably a second hour, so we're gonna accelerate everybody just 30 seconds. If you're gonna do one, we're gonna go ahead, Sky.
Thank you. Aretha Franklin. I'm in Detroit, and I say, I'm here to edit. I'm working on a Ford show, but then they said they need this one little afternoon, and Aretha Franklin walks in, and the producer said, yeah, we're editing a thing that she just did at the Greek Theater in Los Angeles, but she didn't sing R.E.S.P.C.T. And I thought, the most famous song of all. So I'm just a little cog. I'm just a little piece of the whole machine. And I said, Miss Franklin, why did that was something you didn't want to do? And she says, oh, that old thing. They didn't want to hear that. So that was a thing. And then I realized I've also had the great opportunity of working with Madeline Smithberg and Graham Kerr. It's kind of magical, this industry.
Good, Bill.
So I was doing a corporate shoot for Motorola, and this was an odd thing because in my early days I did some talent work, and they had hired me to be the on-camera host for this thing. They were talking about optoelectronic processors, so they wanted something to symbolize pressure. They took us to Hoover Dam, and it was great because we got to shoot all day at Hoover Dam, walking in and out of the tunnels and around. So the last setup of the day, we're in the master control room. Beautiful thing, like 1940s and 50s technology, big handles and stuff like that. And I'm standing there ready to do my part. And one of the minders from the dam comes up to me and says, "How you feeling? You feeling great? Have you had any water lately? Did you have a good lunch?" And the rest of this? I'm going, well, he's being very solicitous. And I said, yeah. He said, well, good. Listen, if for any reason you feel faint, let me know. And I said, why? He said, because if you hit that handle, you're going to turn off Utah.
All right. Next question.
How about
Next.
mine?
Oh, John. Sorry, John. I missed you there. Okay, go ahead.
Mine's really fast. I was doing a presentation for Mike Tyson and his wife about his building his website and doing his social media. This is a decade ago. And I said, here's my plan. He said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. I said, yes, sir, Mike Tyson, but I got the gig.
That's good. That's good. All right, next question.
All right, we're moving on to Joe Floyd in Gainesville. Joe says, anyone else hoping Roland's 3 small announcements this morning will be followed by a larger Blackmagic design announcement soon?
Go ahead, Noah.
Joe, I haven't seen the Roland information, so if you could post that in Discord or at least in the chat, I would love to look that up. As far as the Blackmagic announcement stuff, we're all hoping and waiting.
Go ahead, Jesse.
Same answer. I wake up every day hoping for an announcement from Blackmagic.
Yeah, exactly. Marty.
Yeah, well, we're always looking for announcements from our favorite companies. But the Roland was posted in Mukana. He did post it there, and I see these as more as consumer items, more up Elgato's line than Blackmagic's.
I don't know. The Roland's Aerocaster is kind of cool. I have to admit that from what I understand is it links to your phones. You can have 4 iPhones and it's a hardware switcher. So it's actually doing, it's connecting to it like you would have with, it's kind of a cool idea. It's connecting as if we were doing it with a, share, but it actually then is a hardware switcher that you can cut to. It's kind of an interesting approach. I mean, I do think it's really interesting that Roland they're pretty good at doing something different, that if they fill the notch for what you're doing, you're like, I got to have it, because there's nothing else out there. And I think that they've done a pretty good job at positioning themselves that way, whereas Blackmagic tends to be a more general solution. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Noah Sargent in Fullerton, California. He says, do you think we'll see larger sensors in mass-produced pan-tilt zoom cameras, APS-C, Super 35, and so forth? If so, how long until we do?
Canon's doing 1-inch sensors, so I think that's those are $5,000 each. I mean, I would consider that about as mass market as you're going to get a large sensor into. I think a lot of people don't understand how much of a difference it makes. So to have a large sensor, so I think it's a hard market to break into, because the folks buying the PTCs don't realize that a large sensor would make a huge difference, especially in their events. Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, and to your point, like Panasonic's $10,000 camera has that 1-inch sensor. The Bird Dog has a 1-inch sensor, but they're all like $8,000, $10,000 plus.
The Canon one's $5,000, so that's the
promising.
kind of the end. Yeah, that's the one that is probably a little less. I mean, again, when we just talked about Blackmagic announcements, so many of us just sitting there just going, if Blackmagic put the Super 35 sensor into a $2,000 or $2,500 camera, they would basically crush the world. so it's but you just never know what they're going to be interested in and whether they're going to be interested in that. Next question.
Tobias Moss in Minneapolis says, for office hour style lighting, discuss key light location, straight ahead of you or off center for a bit of drama.
Go ahead, Noah.
So I've temporarily switched to an off to the side key light for now. As you can see, there's kind of a higher contrast on one side of my face versus the other. I typically prefer to have it just over camera, just a little bit above me to the side, and then obviously have some fill. So that's all going to be depending on the type of mood that you're trying to cast, or the setting you're trying to cast. Alex has a more even spread light, right? And everybody has kind of a different look and kind of feel that they're going for.
Yeah, have more of the broadcast approach, which is that you're trying to make everybody look like they're lit somewhat the same. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I have a light panel Astra pointed right up there, slightly off to my left and above, so that it stays off my glasses. Because if I go back there, there it is on my glasses. And then I have a nanolight over here just to offer a little more fill. Because if this gets too dark on this side and you're going for overly dramatic, I have a feeling in UHD it's not going to look good.
Yeah, Rupert?
I'm not sure it's office hours style specifically, but what I have in front of me, I have a triple monitor setup, and what I have is two big soft boxes basically behind the left and the right monitor. Big, I think they're like 24-inch, and I have them on in widthways, sort of landscape, I guess you could say, and I have those just tucked behind, so it just gives me a nice, I think, nice or at least even light there. And I use a Brio, so I like plenty of light, and I can just tune them in the way I want them right there.
Go ahead, Alex.
I do have a big ring light over there, just at this angle, to give a bit of shape.
Yep, absolutely. Go ahead, Bill.
So I just changed because of Office Hours 2.0 coming up. I used to have two panel lights that were my key lights on two sides, and then I've always had two little smaller panels for the eye lights. If you see, I have little two dots in my eyes. That big one up top, though, was a change. I've gone to a big white because I just could not get, as I looked in myself, an HDR in the 2.0 test. I could not get a very even light across my face, so I switched to that large overhead fill light, and I'm hoping that when I get a chance to look at it in HDR, I can make that even things out a little bit. So HDR is changing my lighting.
Next question.
Next one comes from Mitchell Hill in Wilmington, Delaware. Would it make sense to use a plugin like Waves L2 Ultra Maximizer to act as a stage limiter for Office Hours 2.0?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I was talking to Mickey a little bit on After Hours. Of course, Mickey's the expert on all things. But I was thinking that a plug-in or device that would operate as a final limiter, sort of like we used to in radio when we had a look-ahead limiter to protect the STL link back to the transmitter. Just something to be there in case something goes overhead, not something to constantly be acting on it. But I was thinking it maybe like a Waves L2 would be a good choice for that.
It could. I mean, I think that because we're aiming at still such a conservative number, even -20 is a pretty conservative number. If we're hitting in -20, our chances of peaking are very low. So, I mean, I think that would be the only thing that I think it definitely could work. I don't know if it would be needed. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Actually, a discussion last night, Mickey wanted -24 because it did give him that much more room. So -20 is good, but yeah, you're right. The peaking's the issue.
Well, I don't think we're going to peak at -20. The issue that we really have with it is that -24 has been leading to -28 and 29, and so in -24 is okay on YouTube, and -29 is intolerable. Like you're sitting there, you can't hear what's going on. So that's why we moved it up, is because we just can't. That way, if someone goes a little low from -20, they're in a number that actually works, because the dropping 3 or 4 dB after -24 is not listenable on YouTube. And that's the problem that we have. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, I guess the idea though is the LUFS, is not good for measuring peaks or not. It just gives you that headroom between where your LUFS sit and where your actual peak is, and that's what Mickey said. He wanted more room for that range. I'll leave it there. We're good.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Tobias Moss in Minneapolis. He says, for Office Hours 2.0, are we planning a micro-content social media strategy, excerpt clips for Instagram, TikTok, and so forth, blog articles that are basically transcriptions of a Q&A session, etc.? A lot of work, but a lot of potential value, too.
Go, Rupert.
I believe there are some sort of plans in this area. I think we sort of mentioned some yesterday. Not so much on the TikToks and Instagram side for me, but I have been trying to post things here and there, LinkedIn and Twitter and so on. I put out some posts about the Belfast method recently, the Super Saturday, and even the liminal stuff. And those subjects got a lot of traction. I'll put my links in there now. I know other folks have put out their own stuff, but I've been using the hashtag Office Hours Global, which some folks had used before me. I've just kind of tapped onto the to the end of it. But I'll put those links, and maybe we can keep that content going.
Yeah, we're definitely going to expand a lot more. I mean, the first thing that we're going to worry about is just getting a good piece of core content working. The website will be coming up to speed, and we'll have little articles that we're going to encourage people to write if they want. And then we'll do less cutting. So one thing I have to admit that I'm not that excited about is taking conversations out of office hours and trying to cut them up into little pieces, because I think out of context, I don't think it'll go very far. I think that where we need to think about is developing content that supports the content that we're talking about. So like 1 minute or 3 minute little bits and pieces that are setting people up for something or filling in gaps for folks that are really focused and really built for the medium. Now, we will be streaming to all those platforms, mostly so that we can, one of the things that is constantly happening is these platforms are changing in their quality, in their ingest, so as a experiment with figuring out what do we look like on all these different platforms, we'll probably by March be streaming to everything, just so that every day it's just kind of constantly churning. Like even just the HDR has changed the way we look at things. And so we'll just be constantly pushing stuff out and experimenting with what those look like and how it works. And then, but I don't think we'll end up slicing the show up into pieces as much as we will building kind of a process to build other content that supports what we're talking about. So we might talk about a mixed pre-3, but then we'll make a video about a mixed pre-3, not try to just cut out a discussion that's there. I don't think I would watch that much. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, at the risk of sounding contrarian, here I go. The idea of pulling excerpts out of a long show, and if you're just skipping through YouTube and you look at, oh boy, this thing's 2 hours, I don't have time to watch that. But pulling one question out, or maybe even one answer that's 90 seconds or 3 minutes or something, it's literally the easiest way to build an audience. I look at like Joe Rogan's media touch is gigantic compared to everything else, and he's done that for years. I'm not going to listen to a 3-hour Joe Rogan interview,
Right.
but I might listen to 3 minutes of,
It could work. It's a different kind of conversation
Elon
too.
talking about getting high or whatever.
Right. I think he has a different kind of content than we do too. So, and go ahead.
It's a long.
I just don't know. I don't know if our stuff. Maybe, I could be wrong.
It's an excerpt of a long conversation, and getting somebody hooked on that 90 seconds will go, huh, this is an interest. I keep seeing these icons pop up. Maybe I should watch more of these.
Right. Go ahead, Alex.
It's actually getting the algorithms of these social media sites to actually work for us, which means it's tempting on Twitter to say, oh, look at this time code for this moment in this 2-hour video, and that's the answer to your question. But on the other hand, people are doing a search or finding out about something, and you want it so that, say, on YouTube, the next video that they show on down the column on the side is actually one of ours or an excerpt from one of the things that we do. And that does mean doing accepting. But if not accepting, then making videos up to our standard. But we can need to find quick ways of templating it and doing it, which maybe would be like a Keynote file, which has a kind of lower third, an initial slide, lower third, a summary. Here's what I'm about to tell you. Here's what I've just told you. I've told you just this, and then and then essentially just a few slides and a bit of design there, and then encourage people to have a toolkit to make bits of content quickly.
I'm less worried about bits of content quickly and more worried about bits of content well. I don't want to, try to push out a lot of content that is just okay, because then people won't come to it very often. And so, and again, I think that I'm not interested in scale in the way that an average social media program is interested in scale. So, I'm interested in putting the word out there, but I'm not that interested in aggressively trying to get people to show up, because I'm trying to build slowly. Go ahead, Todd.
The difference between, excuse me, showing up. I put my hand up to jump on Chris because I agree completely. There's so many channels that I've subscribed to because of a short clip. Joe
Right.
Joe Rogan's thing is a great model, but there's a difference between having people show up to our Zoom conversations and that whole thing, and just subscribing on YouTube and watching. And these little content clips could be really great because they do end up in subscribes a lot of time, and that just increases visibility
Right.
and some sort of participation.
Right. No.
I'll also third Fenwick's notes, but I'll also say if we're able to maximize on the metadata, right, and when someone's searching for a specific question, and if we're able to link to, in the full show, the similar question or the same question being asked with our answer, that will basically be that hook, I think, as well.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bill.
I just wanted to note that I think Costco in their sample strategy can be informative for this, because I don't think they're regular things that we talk about all the time, but we do talk about leading edge things that it's hard to find information about. So just like a new product at Costco, when they give it to you and you like the taste of it, you tend to buy that. So if people are looking for things that are new and that they do not know about and they want to learn about, that's one of the great attractions of office hours. We do stay very contemporary.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I am interested in doing is building a condensed version of office hours that's a 1 or 2 hours long that goes out every week. That is last week, right? Like this is last week in office hours, and we, kind of less than little bits and pieces. It's more of if you just need to hear an hour or two of office hours, you can't come to all the episodes. We'll take the 10 or 12 hours that we have and condense it down to one that is just nicely cut together. I think that's really interesting from put it up there and just listen to the best of office hours there. I think that could be interesting. Again, I don't know if the way we have the conversation would be as listenable in small pieces, but I could be wrong. But I think that's, I think that we're, because I think it's just hard to get it out in or out of context. I think it's the context that I'm curious about. Next question.
Next one comes up from John Snyder in Reno, Nevada. And John asks, oh, wait a second. No, I missed. Yes, here we go. How do you prevent your computer monitor from becoming the primary light source in your image?
I go, Rupert.
I basically keep my monitors down quite low and then just use plenty of other lights. So they're overridden by these softboxes that I have.
Go ahead, Greg.
Okay, the two things that Rupert just said, plus use the magic dark mode. Get all your windows dark.
Dark mode makes a huge difference. Next question.
Next question
I'm
comes
sorry,
up.
not next question. Sorry, Jesse. Sorry, I just jumped to the wrong thing. I was trying to manage. We're at the end of the hour, so I'm sitting there managing like what questions are we still going to use and which we're on. I was doing too many things at one time. Go ahead, Jesse.
If you have the space, you can back the monitor off away from your face.
Courtney.
And if you don't have the space, look for a polarizing monitor, because all LCD screens have polarized faceplates on them. So as you rotate a linear polarized filter, it will block out the light from your monitor specifically and kill the reflections in your glasses, more importantly, and on your forehead.
I did find that I took out my polarizing filter because I felt that it had a negative effect on my skin. So
but you had it on your lights
camera
as well as your monitor, and if you just put it on the camera but not on the lights, then you will.
I had the same problem. I tested it a bit, and I just took it off the camera because it didn't work out as well as I thought it would. Mitchell.
I think it's important to know if you have a problem in the first place, and if you see lots of blue light reflected in your glasses or in your face, then you might have a monitor problem. In my case, my monitors are flat and they're tilted slightly inwards so that the angle of so that the angle of incidence does not reflect the light back into my face. So that works well enough.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Douglas Carmichael. Do you think the concept of common desk, the co-working space Rupert visited, could be extended to other types of professionals like musicians? For example, flexible studio facilities that could be rented for users to bring their own equipment into.
Go ahead, Rupert.
I think these use cases may emerge over time, and there's probably a few niche things there which makes it geographically challenging to get those kinds of facilities into the right place. But I can say that there's the concept of people trying to figure out what they're to do with their office space is certainly very clear and present. I was driving here recently, and I saw some big car dealerships that are renting out their office space, trying to find something to do with it.
Right. Yeah, go ahead, Todd.
Douglas, this brought up in my mind the old idea of studios. You used to intern in a recording studio just to have access to that. And it's not exactly the co-working space, which is brought up here in Common Desk, but an engineer would go in and work all night from 12 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock just to have access to that equipment. So there's somewhere between there. I think that there might be a model where you had like multiple studios, which would work basically on a headphone basis because they'd all be kind of in the same space, and multiple workstations for people who had a certain degree of knowledge and experience to work in. And that kind of a co-working space might be really cool for musicians, like students of mine who are coming up and don't have a ton of gear, but would love access to a ton of gear after they get out of school. I would think that would be a good model.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I wasn't here for what was it, Rupert's Common Desk presentation, so I might be missing the whole point here. But here in New York, we have a lot of rehearsal studios where you just rent them by the hour. I don't know, and they're not for recording; they're just for rehearsing. And a lot of them will provide drum sets, guitar amps, vocal mics, mixing board just for the room you're in. But you can also call ahead in advance and just say, hey, we don't need your drum set. We're bringing a drum set in, or we need a keyboard stand, but we're bringing our own keyboards or things like that. I was in there for, 10 years ago as a guitarist in a band, and I brought my guitar and my pedal board all the time to those things. But maybe I'm missing something. I don't know if we're talking about the same thing here.
Well, it's a rehearsal studio, but
apologize.
I think it's also, no, I think it's great. You're right on. I think that there's an opportunity to build spaces that people could share. I think that the way that would work the best is if you had collected a lot of people and they slowly coalesced around a certain way of doing things and a certain way of interacting with each other so that it's a little less random, and then have it be something that you kind of built up towards. My idea around that, hopefully, if things go well this year, will be around what we're doing at 3210, in where we have a studio. I'm trying to organize it so that we have the studio all the time. It's just a matter of figuring out the finances. So, but if we had that, then a lot of us could be using it. But I think that where it really doesn't work is when you have lots of random people and, Yahoo's coming in and messing up the equipment. So that's the way to make it work is to have a more structured, system of people who have proven themselves already before they're. So you need to find someone who already knows how to do it before someone has to be certified on those cameras or that mixing board or that whatever, and you have to include them in your production or you're not going to get to use the system. So that's the kind of thing I think that it will take a little longer to set up, but I think it'd be more effective. Next question.
Next one comes from Noah Sargent in Fullerton, California. Is anyone interested in the Cybertruck electric F-150 electric Silverado expected to be unveiled at 1/5/2022? Or so forth.
We'll go pretty quickly through this one. Go ahead, Greg.
I'm not particularly interested in any of those, but I'm extremely interested in the Rivian vehicles.
Yeah,
those to me look like the ticket.
Yeah, Charles.
Yeah, I know a few people that pre-ordered the Cybertruck. I was told that I couldn't have more than one car at a time, so I did not.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Ordered the Cybertruck four-wheel drive.
Sky.
We've had a Nissan Leaf, an electric car. Total electric is a completely different experience. You don't just pull into a gas station and fill up. So it's a whole different attitude, but having the longer battery life, I'm very interested.
And go ahead, Rupert.
As soon as backfeeding my house with an electric vehicle becomes permissible, then I'm very interested. Big UPS.
Next question.
Stefan Fischer in Würzburg, Germany is up next. When recording a Zoom session on a MixPre, do I need to record channel 1 and 2 of the USB input, or is one channel enough because it's mono anyway?
Go ahead, Noah.
My understanding is you can set your Zoom to stereo, but you got to think of the meeting, right? Are you recording musicians and, is it a bigger thing, or is it like just conversations? And so mono will work in a conversation. And then when we move to spatial audio in a few years, then you'll need a recorder that can do that.
And go ahead, Jeff.
So if it's truly mono, one channel is enough, as Noah said, but it doesn't take up a huge amount of space. Audio doesn't. So I would go stereo, because depending on where you're going to share that file or how you're going to use that file, some people may get confusion with mono. Stereo is just more normal.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Rupert McRae again. With many CES exhibitors choosing virtual options, do you think they're choosing to stay within the CES virtual platform or seeking out wider engagement options on a more accessible platform?
Yeah, I think almost everybody's doing their own thing. I mean, I think that the problem these conferences have had is because they didn't take a leadership role in the program, because they didn't get ahead of it, they don't really have a solution that people want. So when people think about virtual, they are not thinking about using the platform that's based within the conference. And that's because the conference didn't take, they really want to bring people back physically. So they underinvested, and it's probably going to be a lethal error for most of these conferences, is underinvesting in the virtual platform that they could have used to aggregate people, but now they've all gone their own way and they've all figured out their own way of doing it. And the chances of most of them coming back are pretty low. Next question.
John Foltz in Sullins Grove, Pennsylvania asks, can Alex talk about the Calvary graphics program? Where does it fit in with motion and After Effects?
Go ahead, Alex.
Because we don't have much time, and also because I actually haven't used Calvary, I'll explain to what it is. It seems to be some people who like the idea of motion but want a cross-platform app, and the idea of motion essentially being a GPU microarchitecture-based motion graphics app, which is what motion was in 2004. But with a user interface that helps people from the After Effects monoculture handle the fact of what modern motion graphics is. So it's essentially a user interface that an After Effects person would like, hiding really the fact that it's just motion underneath there, but it's cross-platform. So the potential is fantastic, and they've certainly been updating it a lot and adding lots of new features. So I'm very interested in that. I'd like also, of course, if they make plugins for Premiere and for Final Cut Pro.
Nice. Next question. We should bring them on. Does anyone know anyone? Do you know anyone at Calvary? I'll reach out to him. Next question.
Tobias Moss in Minneapolis comes in next. Are there multiple ways to create a chat bot in Zoom, in a Zoom meeting chat? And he explained the Zoom OSC plus Isadora method.
Go, Rupert.
The Isadora and OSC method is certainly very flexible, so you could probably do more or less anything you wanted to with that. There are some other chat-related apps in the Zoom app marketplace that you may want to just look at. Just in general, though, whether it's there or anywhere else, watch out for when you're looking at Zoom chat integration, automation stuff, because there are two areas of chat in Zoom. There's the in-app chat that exists in the homepage of the app. That's for like employees to communicate amongst themselves, in an organization, Zoom to Zoom. And then there is the in-meeting chat. So those are separate workflows. So just when you're researching these solutions, you'll want to make the distinction whether you're looking at something that's compatible with the in-meeting chat versus the app chat, which is different.
Last question for the hour.
Ash Yadev, New York City. As artists and corporate brands start to dip their toes into the virtual reality metaverse, should Office Hours start building expertise in VR tech as part of Office Hours 4.0?
Go ahead, Noah.
I think it's smart to at least understand and learn the technology in that sense. But essentially, from my understanding, we have kind of two competing technologies in the sense of like the high quality community driven stuff we're building here versus the metaverse kind of system that's being developed. Right now, it seems, at least from what I've heard, the metaverse system doesn't have good press, I guess, from what I've seen on Office Hours.
Have I told you that Wednesdays are now VR animation 3D? So yes, I think that we should pay attention to it. I think that at this point we're going to start adding more discussions in that area on Wednesdays. I think that the metaverse is going to take a long time to mature. I don't know if it actually will. Just to be clear, I don't know. It'll take a long time for it to get there, and the reason for it is really that there's something about video that we get to see each other, and we get to see where each other, where we are, and get to share things about what we're doing, and we get to do all those things, and that's going to be really. I mean, I've been doing VR and 3D and motion capture for 25 years, and I'm just going to tell you that's really hard. It's hard to pull the rest of the world into the metaverse, and so you can do stuff in the metaverse, and my kids love Roblox and that type of thing, but I think that there is a little bit of I think social media in general and the metaverse specifically has a lot of challenges with giving your frontal lobe the impression that it's going into a community, but not actually feeding your lower brain with an actual community. And I think that makes people crazy. It's kind of I think I've said this before that because they're being told, like, the easiest way, I think I've told this before, but the easiest way to kill ants if you have an ant infestation is to put sugar out and then start cutting it with Splenda. And you just keep cutting it with Splenda until it's all Splenda. You'll kill all of the ants because they can't tell the difference. And so they'll sit there and just eat the Splenda, and the Splenda has no calories. And so they'll just eat it until you literally starve them to death. It's a really effective way to get rid of ants. I've done it a lot. But that's what social media does to us, I think, is that we feel like we should be getting something and we're not. We feel like we should be getting connected and we're not. Like, short little things on Twitter is not a community. Posts that are not who you really are on Instagram or Facebook is not a community. It's not. It doesn't have safety. It doesn't have authenticity. It doesn't have all the things that you need there. And so the metaverse moves us away from that in a lot of ways, rather than towards it. And I think that what we're doing here moves us more towards it. Now, will we pay attention to it and keep on tracking it and being good at AR at least? And we will get good at all the tools that are required, so that if I'm wrong, it turns out to be the next big thing. A lot of us are going to have a lot of those skill sets, and we can easily step into that and take what we already know how to do with it, which is community, and move it into something else. But I think that it's going to be to build true communities is going to be very difficult in the metaverse. And I'm not saying it'll never happen, but I think it could take a little time. Let's jump into let's jump into our second hour. We're now changing subjects to the second hour, and we're going to be discussing all this week. We're discussing basically what we want to do for the rest of the quarter and then really the rest of the year. We're going to combine Tuesdays a little bit into audio and video. We're making a little bit of more room for animation and 3D and other things in Wednesdays. So we're kind of moving these things around a little bit. So when you think about what you'd like to talk about in the audio video realm, remember, for the panelists and for our producers, is we're not trying to answer any questions about these things in the second hour. We are trying to discuss what kinds of things we could discuss, for the rest of the time. So this is a forward-looking project. So don't try to, for the panelists, I know that we had, don't try to answer questions that people bring up. These are the question for us to look at is, are these good subjects that we should create a whole second hour for as we move forward? So ideas, trends, all those things are what we want to kind of think about as we go forward. And we'll start with a little open discussion. Go ahead, Noah.
Sure. Yeah. Just based off of the previous conversations and the questions, obviously there's CES and NAB and these major conferences. So maybe we could do a second hour around the concept of a virtual conference, like Virtual First, and what that would look like, and maybe even talk about throwing our own conference in the future at some point, because we have such a strong pull and knowledge base. I think that would be huge. Secondly, there are a few key vendors that I would love to see on the show, like Blackmagic obviously is a popular one that we've all talked about before. I know you mentioned Adam Savage and the maker community, like that would be a huge thing, and maybe some other vendors as well.
Yeah, and I think that when I think about Tuesdays, I'm trying to think of a little bit of nuts and bolts about video. So, I think that thinking about how to run a conference would probably be something that I might think about on Mondays. As far as like a business model conversation, where Tuesdays, hopefully, we're really talking about in-depth things about video and audio. As far as conferences, my goal is to have the office hours conference that runs all year in the second hour. The goal as we really start thinking these out is to really build it intensely enough that you're getting something that is conference level, every day. And that's why one of the reasons we're spending more time talking about it. Go ahead, Alex.
We might be able to piggyback slightly onto a relatively old social media term, which was around in 2007, 2008, which is the unconference. And we could say we're now going to do virtual unconference. And essentially, we all turn up every day and create the conference right now and create our own breakouts. And just like we used to help with setting the chairs out and putting signs on rooms, we're actually going to be just doing that virtually. So I kind of like that idea of it. Maybe it's slightly formalizing the fact that we're going to do a conference, but not plan it until we actually everyone just turns up, and then we kind of hey kids, let's have the party right here.
I think the hardest part I have is just scheduling more time. So what I like to do is just try to like, how do we schedule it over every second hour as opposed to a whole day? Because it's almost impossible. I don't know how it is for everybody else, but for me, it's almost impossible to schedule a whole day to do something other than work.
I mean, it's interesting in the case of what Apple were doing with their
I thought Apple
where they spread things out for kind of like 7 or 8 weeks, essentially, as they did a WWDC, a quarter of a WWDC over a period of like 8 or 9 weeks, and that seemed, as far as I know, it seemed to generally work. As a topic, and I think this may be much more in the case of business a little bit, but I like the idea of talking to the art of product management, or in terms of people who are in the video world. I mean, of course, I'm thinking of Steve Bays in the case of Final Cut Pro, people, but maybe not just people from Apple or bigger apps, but maybe smaller tools and stuff like that, which actually I now realize is for any product or service, not particularly to do with audio or video. So maybe that's for a different day.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Sky.
I like your concept of certification, if nothing else, to know who's able to do a certain task repeatedly and at what quality, because we have a lot of people that have gear but are still learning how to use it and what its use is. We also have a lot of people that are very deep in very specific categories, and so the coaching concept I'm very interested in, the decision making process of when you can use this tool to do that thing in this context. So go ahead.
And the big thing is for today is we want to try to think about what do we want to see as far as subject matters for audio and video on Tuesdays. Just want to kind of bring us back to
training
that.
and coaching, lab work, specific labs. I think I'm really listening into.
And when we say lab, just so you know, like my definition of lab is really after hours. So we're going to more and more be discussing, like talking about after hours of things as labs. So when we're meeting in after hours, those will be kind of the lab sessions that we're all trying to do, or some of us are trying to do it together.
Yeah.
Whereas the second hours are really, like discussions about something, and in a perfect world, we might end up with a discussion on the second hour, and then at 10 a.m. that day, we have a lab. And if you think about it, we may end up with a bunch of videos. Like the week before, you're told on Tuesday, we're going to have this discussion. Here are some stuff that you could read. And we may even open the question and answer a little early so that you can have a couple days to like put questions in, vote on them, and discuss it and everything else. Then we have the second hour. Then later that day or the next day or whatever, we have a lab, or that week, we have a lab that's related to that second hour that we got excited about. And now we're going to go hang out, maybe even with the same person that did the second hour.
And that also qualifies the R&D of a thing and the familiarity of the task and the tool, because a lot of this is new to a lot of people.
Yeah, Bill.
So I'm fascinated by what's happening in the computational side of not just computers, but our cell phones and things like that in two areas. Obviously, 32-bit float is going to change a lot of things in terms of level setting and audio and stuff like that. But I also noticed it on the video side. I was out with my dog and my wife at the beach the other day, and I pointed my iPhone 12 Plus literally at a shot because some dogs were playing in the water. And I realized when I looked back at the file that it had automatically switched to 10,250th of a second at f2 and got a really nice exposure. And I was thinking, my gosh, this works so fast, and successfully captured an image that, as a photographer who's been shooting for a long time, I would never have been able to make those changes and get to that shot. So I think the computational side of capture, if nothing else, not what you do with the shots, but capture, is really changing everything.
Right.
And I think we need to discuss that as much as possible.
Yeah, go ahead, Noah.
I think the thought maybe of forming or organizing producer teams, like taking AWS as an example, and guiding the team, right? They spent weeks building that and putting that together. So maybe there's some sort of thematic organization that can be have had where, we assign people from office hours to do specific workshops, and then we plan that ahead of time and have people meet on their own to build those out.
Yeah, I mean, in my head right now, I am kind slowly breaking things up. So just so you know, as a definition, there's like a second hour there's first hour, which is general discussion. There's second hour, which is a more focused discussion. There's labs, which we're all playing together in after hours, and there's workshops, but those most likely be paid. so that the idea is that a person can put a ton of time into it, like we can have but a person may do a bunch of labs and we all get kind of good at it. And then that person can say for $10 or $20 for an hour, you can, I'll spend a day or whatever it is, that they can spend time, because finding a way that we can remunerate some of our experts to really spend prep and plan for 4 hours, it benefits us to have that model. To have a situation where, workshops can be something that, there's a ton of things. Like I would love to do some labs on modular synths with Todd. It'd be fun to do like little 1 hour ones over a little bit of time. But at some point it'd be great to spend a day with Todd, and make sure that I can give him a reason, or it's not even giving him a reason. It's giving people the ability to stop doing whatever else they're doing to pay the bills, to do that thing, to help us, that they can spend a week, if enough people sign up, they can spend a week working on it. And on a larger, so we want to give them the ability to do that. And it's an amazing amount that people have contributed to the community already, coming here every hour, on these sessions, doing those things. But if we really want to move to that next level of education, it'll be a mixture of us chipping in, some to make it happen. Like I have ideas of doing short films and letting everyone watch the entire process of a short film get built. So like think of 10, 15, 20 live streams over a month while we build this, and it all culminates in something. And then we get to watch, Chris cut it, and Alex do some graphics, and Charles does, some color correction, and we get to watch all of that and have conversations with them. But the only way to really make that work is to pay people so that they can cut the time out to do it. And that means that, if we all chip in, we could build something that was amazing. So when I think of workshops, I'm just using that as an example of a workshop. For me is going to be a different, definition than the labs or the second hours. Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, another thought is essentially if we keep the same structure, having like a conference, that word itself, and I'm sure there are other words that are like marketable that will draw more people in.
Yeah. So the one thing that we are going to get more focused about is letting people know what the second hour is. So, so we'll have a Twitter account that will get people to we'll post it every day, like in the office hours Twitter account. This is what's happening today, kind of thing. But I think that getting better at having people tell their communities that they're going to be on office hours, having us make sure people know that people are going to be on that office hours, is probably the number one driver of people joining. I mean, we had, again, welcome to the people who are watching, but we had hundreds of people join last week because of one of the guests, or a couple of the guests. Go ahead, Marty.
So as we continue to deal with hardware availability and supply chain issues, and computer chip shortages. This was a discussion on Discord on a couple of channels about moving all those functions from hardware to software, and to eliminate those problems, to work around those problems.
Right.
So that, the process of doing that and how that would apply and would be a useful conversation, but also, once you do that, it opens the door for remote production and getting clients to buy into the concept of remote production. Like I'm booked on a show for the next 2 weeks. I'm going to be like in a studio environment with no more than 4 lav microphones, people talking for 10 hours a day for 2 weeks. And that's ripe for remote production, but getting the client to buy into something like that, I think would be tricky.
Right. Go ahead, Alex.
I think it might be interesting to use the shape of office hours, but to make something slightly different in the second hour, which could be, for example, an hour-long tip show, which will require maybe to some extent a small people production first and pre-production. And essentially what happens is that once there's 30 tips, then we can pick which of the 1 minute tips are actually shown or used. So that would be a little bit of rehearsal, a little bit of planning, but essentially you end up with a bit of content that then feeds people into the rest of what office hours does, because essentially that would be a kind of come for the tip show, but then stay for the labs and stay for the community in which you help other people.
I think one thing that I might think about there is to have a tip show be something that's informal. Like one thing I want to be careful of is not putting. I know we have done it at times, and people do it, and we do it occasionally, but not getting too regular about doing things that require an enormous amount of pre-pro, just because it's something we're doing every day, and we have to kind of be careful of energy expenditure. But I think that it'd be great to have a thing with tips, and then pick, to your point, like we all sit around and talk about the tips that we think are really useful for folks, and then we pick the ones that made the most sense and make little videos about them, that are really short and condensed. If that's what you meant, but yeah, have an informal thing that happens in the second hour, but that drives something that we then rebuild with a little bit of graphics and so on and so forth. Again, the big thing that when I say graphics, my mantra this year is going to be using Keynote for that. So I'm going to be trying to put out lots of little videos using Keynote only. Maybe a little motion for the 3D until the 3D is available, but outside of that, just all Keynote to push things out, because I want to prove that you can use Keynote as a video production tool. That's easy to use, and so I'll be putting something out at least once a week starting next week. It was supposed to be this week, but I got a little busy, so next week it'll start going in. But it'll be something going. All my Mac Break picks will all have a video that goes with them that I'm doing in Keynote, and then I'm gonna, at least inside of office hours, publish the Keynote. Like here's the Keynote document that I used to build that video, and then people can hopefully, because I think as a Keynote user, I have a hard time understanding what's hard and what's easy. Because to me, it's like I just use all the tools, and I can't figure out which ones are supposed to be hard because I've been using them for so long. And so other people look at it and go, "Oh, that's really cool what you did there." And I was like, "Oh, okay, I didn't know. That's the thing you do with Keynote." So anyway, next question.
Danny Law here in the panel from Malaysia is up next with audio chain for live in-person events, which is being live streamed. What is the best practice?
So as a second hour, I think that's a great suggestion. Go ahead, Craig.
First thing that I would suggest is that the audio signal path be split and go to a second mixer, second.
And again, I'm gonna cut you off there, because what we're not trying to do is answer the question. We're just trying to talk about whether, that I know it's a little different subject matter, but we're not trying to fix any question. This is just planning. So that as a suggestion for like what would we build on or extend if we created a second hour out of that. It's just audio chains. Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, I mean, we could apply that same concept to a variety of different events, because certainly from an audio perspective, each event is a whole different workflow, a whole different deal.
Yeah,
so
corporate,
understanding
music,
the difference between them,
yeah,
would be good.
Craig, did you want to add anything to that as far as just the thought process?
No, I'll let it go. Thanks.
Okay. Yep. Bill.
So philosophically, would there be sense to come up with an office hours kind of format to talk through a connection block or something like that we get used to? Say we're going to always start here and go through that, or does it need to be random as we bring in this type of subject? Because this is really kind of an audio flow chain thing. Do you want a format for that?
We could. I mean, if someone's ready to build a template for it, I think it could make sense to do something like that. Go ahead, Jeff.
This could be that several people prepare and bring in sort of their pre-production work on an event and what planning went into it. And so we could have sort of, 2-3 minute example about that, and then questions about that particular event, and cover several in a second hour. Yeah,
I thought that the one that we did about recording orchestras was a good example of just a lot of great discussions and some diagrams and some, like talking about that process. I felt like I learned an enormous amount in 1 hour about something I didn't know anything about. Go ahead, Noah.
I think it could be interesting to break out a decision tree, right? So at each step, what it could have split off into, like mic choice or, routing or effects and that kind of stuff, within a live environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Jeff Francis here on the panel from Columbia, South Carolina. He says, what types of audio labs or workshops would people like to see in second hours and or in after hours?
Go ahead, Greg.
One of the most effective things that I use in my classes are stories, and particularly, stories of things that went wrong and how do you sticky situations, and how do you get out of them? And I think I think that it'd be really good for for us as the pros to be able to to talk about those kind of things.
Yeah, we've done a couple horror story versions, and I do think you learn a lot, and also I think that the mix of what went wrong and then how it was solved is a really good one. It's oftentimes a hard one for us to do in something that's streamed to YouTube, but I think it's a really, to your point, I think it's very effective. Go ahead, Craig.
I've got two things that I'd like to throw in this. One is one of my big goals for this year is to get more into Atmos, learn more about it, and dive into that. And I'd love to see a lot of work on that. I know that's something you're interested in. Sort of following through with the earlier question as well. Second thing would be gain staging for audio. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about gain staging especially when you've got multiple sections through the chain, multiple points in the chain, and I think we could really work on that.
Go ahead, Courtney.
And what I'd like to see is an audio troubleshooting a workshop with samples, prepared with samples of what they sound like, what clipping sounds like, what EMI interference sounds like, what packet loss sounds like, what, all the examples of things that can go wrong with audio, with audible examples of them and visual examples of waveforms, what they look like in a waveform if you're looking for them, to try and cut them out or eliminate them that way. That would be an interesting session or after hours session with and let you learn a lot by listening to the actual problem.
That's great.
And determining.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a great one. Noah?
I'd like to see something where you have like vocals, guitar, bass, on one side, and the other side of the matrix would be like gating, compression, EQ, and basically not the best practices, but what people with a lot more experience than I do, what their tricks and things are for each of those stages, across the board as far as that matrix goes.
Yeah, really understanding how to bring those all together, I think would make a big difference. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, again, horses for courses, and what's the tool that's supposed to be used? And by the way, Jeff, whatever class you teach, I'm there. So, because what I've seen you as an academic is you understand that you are trying to impart information and learning into the hands of the minds of your student. And consequently, you're anecdotal, but you're also very specific on this tool does that thing. And that's what I guess the categorizing of use cases and or case studies of in a corporate environment with a lav on a person that doesn't know how to speak, maybe this is the best place. In a big church setting, this would be a thing. In a YouTube thing, this would be a good audio. So very specific for the 101 of audio, because I'm a video guy.
Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
I've said this before, but the audio that we have available on Zoom is so good that we can actually do things that we weren't able to do in the past. So I'd love to see an EQ workshop where you take a problem file and you listen to somebody who really knows what they're doing, and they, whether it's hardware or software, show me which bands are problematic, vocabulary and a glossary. I find it really frustrating when somebody goes, there's a distortion. Well, that's not really a distortion. I wouldn't call that a distortion. So being able to know how to call out things. And then I'd love a great presentation on compression. Like, show it to me uncompressed. Show me how you're going to fix it. Show me every knob. Talk me through it. Narrate it. Let me watch you work. And then to be able to question somebody midstream, that'd be powerhouse.
Yeah. And I think that talking about this is a good example of,
and we can hear all that on Zoom. It's gonna be like we're in the room. It used to be you'd talk about EQ. It's like, well, it sounds bad anyway. So,
well, one of my big interests in talking about moving Office Hours 2.0 to 5.1 in HDR is that I can talk about HDR in 5.1 and show it to you in the stream. Now, we went and get it over Zoom, but I can play it when we insert that into, so, where I'm kind of going with that, and just for people to think about when we talk, when you're thinking about what we could train, if we talk about HDR, we talk about 5.1 immersive, we'll set up a remote, let's say a parsec session or whatever. And so somebody who wants to show us something will be mixing something, but it's going into the YouTube stream, and they're able to, start putting it on. If you have the speakers or the, stuff to listen to it, you'll be able to actually hear it moving around you. And that's something that we haven't been able to do in training. So we haven't been able to train people to do up until now because none of the platforms supported that, or no one was ready to do that. And so, again, the same thing with video. If we're talking about something in Zoom, we can only see so much. But what happens when we can stream 4K HDR out to everyone who's watching? They're going to be able to see something at a level that they, if they're watching on the right platforms, they'll be able to see something that we haven't been able to do before. Go ahead, Bill.
I'm just interested in level branding. Is it needed or not? And what I mean by that is, are we talking today about beginner, intermediate, advanced? Do we have an arc across one show of those?
It's just all the subjects we want to cover.
No. I'm saying this for the structure of shows that may come out for the next year. In other words, sometimes people are talking SSL consoles, and I'm going, okay, I don't really need to be involved in this because that's not what I use. I need the 4-channel field mixer, and I need to have that talked about in terms of gain structure. So I'm just saying, is there any sense to having some sort of way to communicate to our audience? We're at this level today on these kinds of discussions. Yeah. Next time we'll do something more advanced, and then more advanced after that.
I think talking about mixing is something we would do in a second hour. A deep dive into the SSL or a Digico or whatever would be something we would do in after hours. Like, like I think if you think about, like, we're not going to dig through the dials and again, there's a layer there is the second hour that's a discussion of just this general pieces. There's a lab that we sit there and someone plays with it and you see it and everything else. And then let's just say that there eventually is a certifications workshop that you're going to take that's 8 hours or whatever that you're going to take that is I now want to learn how to use an SSL and I have one, or whatever that is. Or maybe we let you work, this is how to do it with a virtual, like understanding how to run the QL remotely, and you can have that interface or whatever that is. So I think that's I think that there's kind of layers of depth that we're kind of looking at. But I think that in general, when I think of second hours, I don't want us to get away from not we've had some great geeky discussions about things, and I think we want to do that. But most of them should be, unless we're introducing a new product that we all want to see, most of them I think should be less device specific, unless we're clear that an enormous number of our viewers are using it. So like
on that note, Alex, it was setting the layer, exactly what I was talking about. I think, the audience wants all these things, but some of them want lower end stuff. Some of them are fascinated with the higher end stuff. Is there any way to signal to them what this next thing is going to be about?
A better description, like a longer description about what we're talking about, and then they can decide what they want to do.
There you go.
Go ahead, Greg.
And, further on that topic, if we could get into the basics, the basic concepts of things like mixers. If you look at the basic concept of a mixer, they're all the same. It's just a question of features. So the low end and the high end, they do the same thing. So what is it exactly that they do?
Right. And you know what I mean? That when we apply that to video, it's mixers or switchers and cameras and microphones and, like all of these things of like, these are the basics of that. And I think that, going back to that every once in a while and really making sure that we cover that, because we may know a lot about one thing but not the other. That's the beauty of a heterogeneous mix of people in the group, is that doing a basic one is applicable to a lot of people because it's not their specialty. Go ahead, Marty.
So I think it's a great idea to sort of matrix decision processes about microphones, mixers, applications, use cases, and processing like EQ and compression. But then once you have that basic knowledge, we have to recognize that doing audio in particular, and in some cases video to some degree, is both an art and a craft. And the matrixing decision would be the craft part. The art part is the creative stuff, and that can and sometimes break all those rules. And figuring out how to use the art to achieve a certain sound or look, that's a more advanced topic that's worth covering.
Yeah. That was every time I think when you say that, I remember talking to Ben Burt about how he records guns. Like that was his thing, and he says the big thing is everyone points the mic towards the gun. You point it away from the gun. It's how does the sound of the gun interact with the environment, and but to your point, it's like the art of how he does sound effects is really, he has a specific place in California that he records, those sounds, and he said there's just enough grass that goes, just enough trees that goes, shh, and just enough rocks that go, that's exactly how he described it. And I said, where is that? He goes, oh, I can't tell you that. So anyway, but like he was, but it was funny because but when I think about that, it's not what he was talking about is not the tools, not the microphone, not the mixer, not the anything, but how to use them, was the thing that he was, kind of discussing. Go ahead, Todd.
To Marty's point and to Bill's point, I'll begin with my dad. My dad taught amateurs his whole life. It's kind of high school, yes, church, yes, but in his later life, all amateurs. And one of the things that I would love, I've been itching to teach labs for us on Ableton Live and on Max MSP, some of the audio programs which are interesting to me and which I teach in a professional context. And I'd really love to help people who don't consider themselves musicians feel what it's like to be a musician, or people who do feel that they are slightly musicians or stopped when they were 6 years old playing the trombone, who just got a new drum machine. I want to foster some still more fun than you have by yourself. So anyway, that's my offering anyway.
That's great. No, yes, please. Go ahead, Jeff.
This is great because this is helping me, and I think all of us, determine where things fit into second hours and where they fit into labs. So my question is like a dive into mixers, and specifically the ATEM software mixer that's in their hardwares. The ATEM Mini, it's the same mixer that's in some of the larger ones. Does that fall into a second hour, or is that a lab?
I think you could do an overview of a second hour. Like, the thing is that you can get through so little data. So the big thing is that a second hour, the one thing that I've learned about the second hours in general is that you really shouldn't talk more than 10 or 15 minutes. None of us should talk more than 10 or 15 minutes. Number one is it makes it way easier to design it, because just think about how to do 10 minutes, of content. Don't think about how to do an hour of content. So it's a little more approachable that way. Also, I just watch our viewership tank and even our panelists start to get droopy-eyed when people talk for more than about 10 minutes. Like, it starts to wind out, really, really fast. And I don't know whether that's just us or that's just the way that the internet is, or so the big thing is that a discussion in a second hour is really more of an introduction to something, and then a bunch of Q&A that may dig deep into it. So we want to have a bunch of people that can answer questions about the mixer inside the ATEM, show a couple things that you absolutely have to know, and get you introduced to it. Now, there may be a lab where we're going to spend an hour just going through it and doing something and doing all the mixes and everything else. That would probably is a little bit slower than what we would do in a second hour. And then again, there could be something else. That could be a workshop that we're going to send you a bunch of files, and we're going to have you pump them in and have you do stuff together and ask questions. And that's going to be like a 4-hour session for people who are really serious. Because I think part of it is who, the widest number of people get some knowledge out of it, then the people who are pretty serious about it. Like we've had Isadora, we've had Mark on to talk about Isadora, and we've had Andy talking about it. And now once a week we're getting, we have Elle coming on, who works there, like walking us through stuff, and it's very slow, and we're all just connecting. I don't think that would be a show that I'd put on YouTube, but but a lot of us are learning how the nuts and bolts actually work, to make that work. So I think that it could be the same subject, just with different levels of depth. And the thing is for the folks that eventually want to do the workshops, the best way to do that would be to support a second hour, support a bunch of labs, so that people get to know what you know and how to do it, and then say, I'm doing for the folks that are really serious about this, I'm going to do a workshop for a day or 4 hours or 3 hours, and it's going to be, so there's a kind of a funnel, so to speak, of how people learn about it or get interested in it. But I think that the second hour should be a lot about getting people excited about something and answering their questions about it, so that they can really get it into their head about how it works. And then the labs and eventually the workshops become something that's a deeper dive into those things. Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, this is pretty cool. The number of audio brain cells here that we have is just amazing. There are a number of people here who have taught audio classes, myself included. I do a Monday class for Hybrid Ministries. I'd be happy to move that to after hours. And hearing everybody else just, bring it all together, this could be major.
Yeah, and I think that in all the subjects that we're talking about in office hours, I think we have those brain cells. I mean, we have a lot of audio folks here today, but I think that when you talked about video, when you talk about, again, animation and 3D, there's a lot of people who know a lot of things, and so we wanted to constantly look at these second hours as a way to kind of make sure that they get the exposure they deserve, and we get some to learn a couple things from them as well. Next question.
Next one comes to us from John Snyder in Reno, Nevada, and John says, topic idea, basics for getting audio video up to snuff for Office Hours 2.0, basics of mixing, troubleshooting, AV, and so forth.
And we've definitely, that's something I don't think we can do enough of, but we've definitely done some of that in the past. Go ahead, Jeff.
Troubleshooting is a topic all to itself, and it's something that is you can learn the basics of troubleshooting, sort of a basic attack method, but each individual problem is its own problem. And so a lot of those, I think, specific problems should be an after-hours thing where someone that's there can help work through a particular problem. But we can definitely talk about troubleshooting, and that's something that should happen beyond just, audio and video. There's troubleshooting for computer software as well and networks.
Yeah. It's one of the things, and I think it's pretty much my whole life, that you learn that a lot of it really is, this is why I want to get to a point where we start to stream while we're working. So like these bigger events where we do like a 2-minute short, but we're going to show you the model makers working and the people drawing the storyboards and the story, the story development and everything else, is because they often say, oftentimes people say you don't want to see how the sausage is made, but that's actually really useful to see how the sausage is made, and it's really useful to see how professionals handle challenges, and how they approach it and how they figure it out. And I think, to your point, that troubleshooting, sometimes troublemaking, oftentimes they go together. But the troubleshooting, it was kind of one of those things that you just need to know, like there's things that I'll see and I'll immediately know it's wrong, only because I've done hundreds of events and I just go, oh, I know what that sound is. And I don't know how to teach someone that, like to pay attention to some little, bit. I was complaining last night on Twitter that there was a CEO that was talking about, I don't know, some glass-based thing for your chair. And he was reading it on a national ad. He's reading a teleprompter badly. And of course I was on Twitter like, you shouldn't do that, and most people pointed out no one can notice that, but anybody who's worked in production long enough knows what they're doing. And I think that finding ways to give people an opportunity to see it not working and then see people point it out and then react to it, I think is important. Go ahead, Noah.
I feel like there's a few things in there, like frequently asked questions, like common themes that we've heard several times before, and maybe there's some sort of updated like FAQ on the website that we can put up, but also specifically around producing a video, right, of like the most current office hours like approved gear list or recommended gear list, something like that, that gets updated often.
Yeah, so we're definitely talking about that as well. I mean, beyond the second hours is having a blog-ish kind of thing. I mean, almost a wire cutter kind of thing of like, hey, we really found that this worked well, or this is what we liked and didn't like about it. And engaging different people in the community to write those and keep them short, and easy, but things that we're all working on. And rather than what I'd like to do is move away from having us as reviewers and more of people here just talking about tools that they have and a quick thing of, this is what I like about it, this is what I wish it did better, like that's, rather than, and giving people a real from the trenches reviews and suggestions from what we're using, not like something we got for 2 weeks to look at and try to figure out how it works. Go ahead, Todd.
troubleshooting thing, I think, is the most important thing for me. I've learned how to troubleshoot my own gear for many years. But when I started hanging out with everybody here in after hours, especially, every single interaction is a troubleshooting event. And I think there are some really basic principles for troubleshooting, and I don't think we actually talk about them enough.
Yeah.
As basic problems for everybody to pay attention to. One of the things I end up telling people the most is that, there's always a solution. It might be taking your MacBook and throwing it out the window and buying one that's 8 years newer, but it's working somewhere else. And if it's working somewhere else, then there's got to be something that's fixable in your
Right.
situation.
And it's one of the reasons also that I try to push away from people going to a breakout room to troubleshoot in after hours, is because I want us all to learn from what they're doing. It's kind of like a crow funeral. If you've ever seen a crow funeral, when a crow dies, a whole bunch, like hundreds of crows will sit there. And what they're imprinting, what most people think that they're doing, is imprinting the environment in which that crow died, so that they can avoid it. So go ahead, Sky.
Well, Alex, you've kind of given this opportunity of breathing in this week's listening to each other, and your comment about people don't want to know how the sausage gets made. I heard the other day that a student didn't understand that what they were eating actually was a living thing that was out in a field at one time. And so, because they've only ever seen the thing presented in plastic. So to that point, I think just because you're in a McDonald's doesn't make you a Big Mac. I have my one quote card to play today.
You played all of them. I think you have a whole deck that you've been playing.
No, that was the intentional one. The rest of them were accidental. I've got so many I throw away. But the point that I'm trying to get to is, because now everybody is being asked to be a producer, because everybody's now, the world is asked to be an actor. The world is now being asked. I think just because we have the equipment, we have this expectation we know how to use it.
Right.
And so that's why I love this basics concept.
Yep.
And also the attitude of, just because you have it doesn't mean you should be expected to know how to use it. And Todd, you're the best example, because you're very, very candid about, these are tools that are unfamiliar to you. You need help. So thank you for letting me play my quote card of the day.
Okay, Chris.
A couple of weeks ago, we were driving through our neighborhood, Alex. You mentioned the crow thing. And we have seen this multiple times on the corner. There was a bunch of crows that had gathered, and we called it Crow Church, because it looked like the one crow was preaching to the others. And we drove by, and I was like, I got to get a picture. And I get out, and as I approach, one of them moves, and I realize this is a prop that the neighbors had set up in the front yard.
There we go.
Periodically.
Yeah.
But
fake murder.
We called it Crow Church.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Jeff.
Before we leave the topic of troubleshooting, we need to tie it to the signal chain. And I think the biggest thing we get is when people are asking questions about troubleshooting an issue, they don't provide enough information about their complete signal chain. And you have to know your signal chain in order to troubleshoot your signal chain.
Yeah, so understanding how to describe that and how to document it, I think is useful. Next question. Oh, and by the way, we're running out of time and I do have to go at a regular pace. So for all of you, just try to keep it moving and concise, because we've got a lot of questions and not very many minutes. Next question.
Jason Panks in Nashville. Should we explore spatial audio and maybe have a lab?
Yeah, we're going to do a lot with spatial audio. The spatial audio is going to become a very, very big deal over the next 2 years, and it's going to be super important that we get our head around it and really understand it and are able to execute it. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I've just started playing with this quite a bit. Got an Ambisonics microphone, and I'm going to try seeing if we can actually convey this via binaural headphones so that people could listen in a Zoom meeting or on YouTube and hear things in live time.
Mickey's already done it. So Mickey's.
Of course he has.
I know, Mickey. There was some early. It was before even After Hours existed. Mickey was like, "Check this out," and he had his stuff moving all around in binaural inside of Zoom. and what happened was we couldn't figure out why I was turning on and off. This is back when we didn't know that the phone was causing, anybody who joined with a phone degraded our system. So we couldn't figure out why it didn't work. But yeah, we'll definitely experiment with that. It is because Apple has locked in all the labels now are building everything in spatial. Like they're all trying to remix everything they already had. Every new major release is being, approached with spatial in mind. It's something that, and as we move towards more and more live solutions as well, it's going to get to be really, really important. So we're definitely going to talk a lot about it this year. Next question.
Jason Panks right back from the second one from Nashville. Back to the basics. Second hours on EQ or compression or audio chains and similar ideas.
And go ahead, Noah.
Absolutely. Obviously, you need to know the fundamental of how those all work, but then to take it a step further of applying those to the different instruments, vocals, situations, and then finally how to tie it all together with those effects.
Yeah, Marty?
Yeah, and adding to what Noah was just saying, the different types of compressors, because there are compressors that act differently on different kinds of signals.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
John Snyder in Reno, Nevada is up next, and he says how to approach different event types differently, for example, music versus corporate, and so forth.
Yeah, and I think we talked to that one, so we definitely agree that thinking about approaching different kinds of events is going to be definitely useful. Next comment.
Moving out to Fullerton, California for Noah Sargent here on the panel. Second hour on building a live sound mix for house of worship bands and so forth.
Yeah, I think that is all fitting into like thinking about styles and talking about those processes would be useful. And again, yesterday we talked a little bit about trends. And so one of the things I'm really trying to think about is how we think about this as the year, as the quarter, as the month, as the, and building threads. So the first Monday of every month is this, and the second Monday or Tuesday is this. And there's just, we're trying to fill in these gaps. And so I'll be kind of thinking through that a lot this week and proposing some ideas, and we'll see what people think of them as far as how we're going to cover those things. Next comment, question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana, is up next, and he says, failover planning, situations where you're forced to use wireless tech or IP tech.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I don't know about failover, but as far as wireless tech would be, a good second hour would be a frequency coordinator, somebody who does this for a living at a venue, to coordinate frequencies and deal with the crowded RF space and how to handle that with your wireless gear and how to address wireless situations.
Yeah, Marty.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about talking about wireless and what goes into it, different antenna types and how to utilize them and how to think about antennas, because you're not pointing an antenna at a point in space. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, Sky.
I vote up Keenan as a disaster recovery person. He's very keen. He knows that to the seventh layer deep of how to do failovers.
Next comment, question.
Alex in London, up next, video, audio, post-collaboration, workflow bake-off. Teams stand by and producers suggest changes to the film they're making, and the teams show how the changes are carried out in the collaboration system they're using.
Go ahead, Alex.
So the idea is that both teams have exactly the same footage and the same stage of production. And then it's just interesting to know to what extent if somebody, a producer, like in the world of TV or film, or in the case of music, says, can you make a change, that people who are in different places from each other, how they collaborate to make the change and who makes the change and how it's approved. And you see each change being made kind of on the spur of the moment based on what a producer would say. So with not knowing what the change is that the audience may ask for in terms of, or could you replace the sound of that truck going by, or is it possible to reframe this shot, or whatever it is, the nature of the production. So it's a kind of stuff that's very difficult to people to really understand the practicalities of these things, but we can set up quite complex setups. And during a second hour to say, look, here's a reference of the same change being made to using two systems. Not to say one is better than the other, but just how they're different.
Yeah, I do think, and thinking about an approach so that you can be, I think that's probably either a lab or a workshop. As far as breaking that up, it'd be hard to do in a second hour, maybe do it done. But I do think that building a project to be editable is super important. Like, how do you build something so that you can actually change something in real time while a producer's sitting behind you? Whether that's audio or video. I know I when I rendered out the Queen ship for Star Wars, I rendered it in 22 passes. why did I do that? Is because when the visual effects supervisor stood behind me, I could sit there and just move a slider around and change the reflectivity or the specular or whatever. I didn't have to re-render the whole thing. And so thinking about that pipeline of how to do that and how to set those layers up so that you can make those adjustments, I think would be very valuable. Next question.
Alex is right back again from London with topic idea, improving your sound in Adobe Premiere, Apple Final Cut, DaVinci Resolve Productions. A, staying just in the app. B, using third-party plugins in the app. C, using external applications.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's like 8 second hours there of how to do those things. I think it's a matter of, figuring it out. But I do think that, talking about different workflows in those different apps could make a lot of sense. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, I think we actually could help a little bit in the development because certain features are going to come to certain products first. And if we got in there and, played with them a little bit, then certainly we could drive both what we could do here, but also potentially push back to the manufacturers.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Sarah Doyle's up next in Falls Church, Virginia, and she asks, multiple language streaming and workflows. Any thoughts?
Yeah, that'd be great. We should definitely do that because there's a lot of, and a lot of us have thought a lot about that. So there's a team within in office hours that's dealing with over 10 languages at a time and how to stream all of those languages out. And I mostly deal in kind of the 6 to 8 pretty often. And one of the kind of the cutting edge things of that area is we're thinking about how to use immersive sound as it relates to, translation or interpretation, where one of the things we started to experiment with, I haven't gotten tuned just quite yet, but it's starting to work where if I put the interpretation in the left surround or right surround, it's like someone whispering to you when you're watching the show. So you can listen to the show and you're using a different speaker and a different part of the brain to kind of feed the information into you. So I think that there's some interesting things we could do there, both in just the basics of how to make that work and also the how to take it to the next level. Next question.
Comes from Andy Lipnick in San Francisco, and he starts with a quote and says, "It's not about the gear or software." And his question is truly understanding traditional or modern signal flow so you can solve or avoid audio issues.
Go ahead, Sky.
Well, I'm just great to hear Andy's voice and also that he's I'm voting with him on story first as a concept.
Yep. Go ahead, Todd.
Yes.
Yeah, it's I think that the thing that I think core principles, I know we talk about that a little bit, but core principles of understanding what makes something work, I think is super important because people get into all these kind of crazy little things that they can do, but a lot of it is like, okay, how do we do this? Just there's some real basics that a lot of us will use in all areas of production that solves many of the problems, and it's not trickery. It's just what I tend to call basic ball handling skills. Like they're just basic ball handling skills that if you just know how to do, if you just don't fumble it, you'll do really well. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I totally agree. Just realizing that it is really not about the technology. The technology is a tool to further your work based on the stuff that you already know. So,
right. Yeah, absolutely, John.
Andy, you left one out. Cloud. Cloud doesn't make better productions either.
Yeah, and just anything that there's it's mostly just a matter of not getting caught up in the whiz bang. I mean, you can definitely do all those things, but a lot of those become crutches, and then when they fall apart, you don't have anywhere to go. And so I think that's the key to the operation, no matter where that is. Next comment or question.
Alex Golner in London, possible topic, how to create new ways of proving you know how to work with a specific audio or video tool set.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, this is an interesting one in terms of people are self-taught, but to some extent, sometimes even though we can look at each other and we can hear by talking to them whether somebody knows this topic, can we create new kind of qualification systems, or do we actually get somebody who's not sure if they already know to actually give a presentation or something they know? How do we actually work this, and how do we create systems of sharing and also qualifying people or certifying people or not?
Mm-hmm. Here you go, Roscoe.
I got involved with this early on in Final Cut Pro, and no, I don't want to go down that path myself. I think it's not a great area to suddenly sit yourself on the throne and say that we're deciding who is and who isn't. So I love the idea that we show best practices and we help people along, but I don't necessarily, I don't know. I'll leave it. I'm not a big certification person.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I've been noticing that, for example, on LinkedIn, they have that process of 3 people have said that I know what I'm talking about with that. And some people use that and some people don't. But I find services like that increasingly juiceless and uninteresting because they're trying to metricize a whole bunch of things that are reputational and feel. And I just haven't found a good system that does that. I mean, you get a sense of this person really understands what they're doing or you don't. I haven't found anything to replace that.
Go ahead, Noah.
It's definitely a tough subject to quantify something like that, but there are knowledge gaps, especially if you're self-taught. And then the more experience you get, the applied side of the learning process, right? You need to know the basics, but then you need to apply it and fully understand and grasp that. And then to take it a step further, the reason why I admire a lot of teachers is when you teach somebody or try to regurgitate what you've learned, that really just shows your mastery in that sense.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
One of the cool things about the second exam for Dante is they actually give you a simulator of setting up the router and routing everything properly. And that was more useful than all the other parts of the exam.
Anyway, Chris.
I mean, this only applies to certain things, but is this where demo reels can really shine or still work? And maybe a second hour on what really makes a good demo?
Yeah, I'll tell you a secret. I don't know if I've said this before. I've never had a demo reel, ever. And it's always, it's, in my whole life, I thought about it. I keep on thinking that I should have a demo reel. Someday I might actually have one, but I've gone 30 years now without a demo reel. Go ahead, Alex.
Speaking as an editor, demo reels for editing are almost totally pointless from my opinion, because who knows what went behind them or what the problems were and where the ideas came from. And then if you compile all those edits together, what does it even mean? But in practice, I was thinking in terms of a different kind of demo in which during after hours, you demonstrate you understand something by saying, okay, I'd like to actually demonstrate that I know this thing. So can I record the next 10 minutes of me explaining something with all your permission? And then find a way of keeping that record so people can say, oh, look, here's me talking about Dante. And then people are like, oh, okay, they seem to know what they're talking about. So we use a kind of version of the Socratic method in terms of it being conversation, but being slightly one-sided, but essentially reeling off what you know in 10 minutes or maybe in 5 minutes with some people asking a couple of questions. And if you know the answers, then people are going to trust you a little bit more.
And there's probably like in a Monday session or something, and probably a whole second hour on certification, just what we think would be useful. I know that for us, my what we found the most useful was martial arts, what I would call martial arts style testing, which is that I will show you how to do something, and then I will give you only enough time to do it that if you had to use all the keystrokes, like if I taught you Photoshop, I'll literally give you the file that you need to update. You need to composite this in, do this, and I'll only give you enough time that if you use the mouse, you can't do it. Like you have to use all the keystrokes, and you have to learn it to a point where you can just go. When we did this in Pixel Core, you'd see people and their fingers would just be like, because they had just practiced it like you would practice a piano, like you would practice a piece of art. They would just practice playing that song. The song, here is the song. Now play the song. Like in the song is a composite, and they would practice it over and over again to get that done. So it's like doing the scales, or just learning a song, but I really thought of it that way. Do a bunch of those, learn a bunch of those songs, a bunch of those musical pieces. And that's how I know that you know how to use Photoshop to some degree. And does that make you does knowing how to play a song make you a great guitar player or a great keyboardist? No, but it does tell me that you've done some practice in that area. Now I'll put you into jobs, and you can start learning by actually doing useful things with other people. But you're not useful until you can move quickly through the whole system. And so that's what when I think of certification, is what I think about. Next question.
Next question comes from Douglas Carmichael. And Douglas says, Alex, I like the idea of remuneration for value added, thinking of the core ethos of a global conversation where no one's left out. How will we guard against leaving those in low income groups or the disabled out of the conversation?
I think we figure out a scholarship program for that. It's just, or some way to let people do that. So, I mean, I think that there's ways for us to sort that out, especially the great thing is when you do it in a digital world, you can figure out ways to make that more available because there's not the same cost of putting somebody into the room, so the cost per person is lower. So we might say that you may not have all the same abilities to ask questions in certain levels, or there might be a certain part where most of the people who paid for it are doing something, and then we open it up for a little bit and then we go back through it. But I think that we can find ways to do that. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Donation required versus just donation accepted. I don't think you necessarily need to require fees.
Yeah, it's just hard to model. I've worked with a lot of groups that have done that, and it's just hard, it's a hard model to do. But we might be able to have. Yeah, we'll play with that. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back again with another one. This time he says project and people management with tools like F-Track.
Yeah, I think those are Monday sessions, but I think that those are something, or actually Friday sessions were real, like, how do we do this thing? So I think that we'll definitely pay more attention to that. Next comment or question.
Douglas Carmichael's went back in. Sky, he says, I like what you said about the certification program. How would you guard against someone who can take tests well but can't think laterally or apply the concepts that they have learned? Would a portfolio or reference system also be useful?
Go ahead, Sky, real quick.
This is a longer conversation. I think a lot of this was answered in 2 questions back. So go back and listen to the video.
Next question.
Robert Harris in Minneapolis says, lab on developing long story arcs.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. I mean, I want to definitely, I think that we're putting those into Thursdays. I think I actually want to put them into Fridays of the nuts and bolts of, like, how do you develop a story, and, is a more of a Friday session, because I think on Thursdays, what I'm going to really try to do as much as we can is bring actual artists in, to just play music or draw or talk about their art form, and not make it about the technical parts of how to do the thing. For me, the most transformative thing, I talked to a friend of mine that writes for TV, and it said, just write 26 scenes into three acts. There's get them up the tree, or describe the tree, get them up the tree, get them down the tree, and do that in 26 scenes, and you're done. And it made it much easier to think about than that's someone who just writes these all the time, every day, and so they just said it's just the math of a movie. Go ahead, Bill, real quick.
Yeah, real quick. I just wanted to say there's so much now that people are sending out an entire season at once that these long story arcs are going to become more and more important, because I don't think you can get the funding and to do things unless you have a long tail on your projects as much.
Yeah. Last comment or question.
Todd Reynolds, North Adams, Massachusetts, our friend here on the panel, says creating social media content using Final Cut Pro, Resolve, etc. for TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and so forth.
Go ahead, Alex.
Refer to the previous question. You've got to create a story arc for your social media too. So there's 2 parts to it. There's the actual policies and plans and branding and all aspects of what you're doing. And then there's the practicalities of dealing with the different stories and the different ecosystems of each of the different kinds of social media worlds. So actually, I realized there are 3 parts to it. There's the story part, the branding part. That is the first part. The second part is the various ecosystems, the various different environments where you have to lurk for a while and understand the nature of Instagram versus TikTok, etc. And the third part, the actual practicalities of setting things up in terms of graphics and layouts and stuff to do with social media.
Go ahead, Todd.
So I nominate you, Alex.
For what?
So, no, Alex 4D Goldner.
Oh, okay.
Sorry for the confusion.
I was like, what? How did I just pull into this conversation?
No, he just laid it out. Mine was actually a technical question, but I love, of course, first of all, I love the previous storytelling question. I want more of that. Everything that Alex said. I also was thinking about Liberty White as I framed this question, because she is also, not to put responsibility on her, but she is in that game very, very highly. And so I was just thinking about more the technical thing of when you shoot, how you shoot for these different formats. And there are people who do this, like, as you know, Alex, there are people who do TikTok amazingly on a phone. And there are then people who use entire studios. For me, I have an entire studio at my disposal, and I cannot figure out for the life of me how to make something that would really be high quality and put on there to get stuff into a phone in real time, stuff like that. So it's all these kind of practicalities of like how to use Final Cut and the formats and how this all kind of works. It's a little bit of a mystery to me. So that's why I'd find it interesting as a second hour. And I wondered if anybody else would as well.
Oh yeah, it'd be great. And I think that bringing people in, seeing if we can find some creators that have gotten to a reasonable level. Like I think that we brought Ritchie in to talk, but I think it would be fun to bring him in to talk about his like process, like how does he build a YouTube video or and obviously some other folks that I know that I think that we can possibly bring in that would talk about their process. And then I think that one of the things that would be useful, and I want to do more of this more in a lab section or possibly a workshop, but more of a lab of let's go shoot a bunch of files and then upload them for everybody. Like one of the things I'm really interested in for this year is figuring out if we can use camera to cloud where you watch us shoot something and while we're shooting it, it's going up to, Frame.io and everyone can just download they can watch us shoot it and they can download all the files and start cutting them together and start asking questions with like, what did you do there? And why did you do that? And so there's this kind of pylon of creativity of us trying to figure like a whole bunch of different people approaching it and then breaking out, talking about like, how did we do that? And what did we do? And, why did, Alex do this and Chris do this and, like all these different things and what that they were approaching. I think that we would learn a lot. Again, I think that kind of immersive experience is oftentimes more useful than us listening to a lecture about how to do it. It's just like dig into it and, figure it out. So I was talking to another person teaching that was talking about that. I think it was Walter Murch that was talking about the fact we were talking about something and he just said, I can give you 5 sounds and I'll just tell you to do the scene. Like here's 5 sounds, just do the scene and just stretch them and turn them and flip them and move them around. And he said, I can do it with the 5 sounds. So I'll play it out and the whole thing will sound like a scene, but they don't sound like what you made them sound like once you put them in, and I think that people figuring out how to do that and package it and cross pollinate our learning would be really good. Like I would love to see, Greg would approach something and have him record a bunch of stuff for us, a bunch of Foley stuff and have him talk about what that approach and then have us all try to figure out how to put it in. And just watching someone like Greg do that or watching you build up again in Ableton. One of the best things that I had was watching you just use it. I mean, I think, but that gets into like a second hour, but I could just sit there and watch you, like how you do the Ableton. Like I always want, when you're doing your show, I always want more shots of Ableton so I can figure out what's going on. It's like, look at the pretty picture, so, but seeing true masters of their trade, whether it's, Jeff miking something up or Greg, Foleying something or you playing or, watching Alex build animations was, really, fascinating. So these are just quick examples of I think more of that is something we want to figure out, but I think it's probably labs, but I think we introduce people, a wider group into the concept with the second hour, and then we go into a lab and kind of play with it. And then people who are really serious about it say, I want to do a workshop or something. So that's kind of the thought process. Anyway, thanks to the producers. Great suggestions. I've written a lot of them down. It's really helps me. I hope it helps everybody here. It really helps me to kind of brainstorm of having some stuff that we can really think about. And I'll be, working on some proposed stuff that we'll all take a look at. And then I'm going to be working pretty hard at finally handing this off to a team and letting them work on it as well with all of you. So that's going to happen over this month while we get ready for 2.0, is that we will have a team working on this. If you're interested in that, you got to ping me on Discord. But we'll have a team that's kind of really managing what this all looks like so that it can grow, because it's grown as much as it possibly can with me. So we need to move past that. Anyway, thanks to the panelists for a great conversation. As always, it's so good to see you. A lot of you I haven't seen for a while. It's good to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to see you. And so we'll looking forward to more fun. Anyway, so thanks for joining us. And now we're going to jump into After Hours. Remember, tomorrow we're talking about animation and 3D and all those other things. So think about the kinds of things you'd want to learn in that area as well. All right. I'll see you in After Hours.